And one of the things that I was, when we're considering this mystery, that this isn't a mystery that was given to Paul. This is a mystery that was given to John, who is seeing this vision that's going to take place during the Great Tribulation. So it may be a mystery that we cannot fully understand and grasp. We're kind of almost in the place that the Old Testament prophets were in, where they had these prophecies of these like great future events, and we're looking at them trying to figure out like, how is this going to match up? Probably like the same way in the Old Testament. They were probably looking at the prophecies about their Christ and saying, okay, well, he's got to come from here, and he's got to come around a certain time, and we're trying to figure out like, when is our Messiah coming? And it's like similar to the way that we're doing now. Like, we're looking at the scriptures trying to figure out, oh, when is this rapture going to happen? And we're looking forward to it. And now we're looking even beyond the rapture into something that primarily doesn't concern the church. It's going to concern primarily the Jewish nation in the tribulation, but there will be other people too that can repent and not follow after the beast and take his mark and his image, and find some salvation during the tribulation. So we may not be able to fully understand it. So I really kind of dug into it and trying to take the different parts of what we've learned and trying to come up with a cohesive theory that can kind of knit all these three parts together, or the different parts, three main parts. But I haven't actually found this taught, what I'm going to kind of get into and teach. It's kind of my own thing that as I'm just going back and forth through a lot of different scriptures, and so this is kind of like my theory of how I think it may work out. Something to keep in mind. I'd be happy to talk with anybody if you have any thoughts on it, or in the future, even in your own readings, if you come across anything, just if you find something that contradicts it, let me know, because this is just, I'm trying to understand it. I kind of lean towards us not being able to fully understand it, but it would just make for some good conversation. Kind of like how when we talked about the mark of the beast and the number, and he told us, let he who hath wisdom, count the number of the beast, and and we have the number, but we don't fully understand it. And John tells us the same thing about the woman on the beast. Here's wisdom, or he makes a similar reference about like, if you have wisdom, that you can understand this. And maybe it'll be a similar thing to the number of the beast, where we can't fully understand it, but I believe when the Antichrist shows up and this mark becomes a reality, and people actually understand what this number is, it's just going to click, like, oh, that's what the Bible's been talking about all this time, and it'll make total sense. But we're like trying to figure out, looking ahead into the future.
That reference you just made,
yeah,
about the Antichrist showing up and then they'll understand, it's kind of like what makes me think of when Jesus comes. We'll get our new bodies and we'll be glorified. And you know how Satan copies everything Jesus does?
Yeah.
It kind of sounds like the same exact thing. I don't know if that was just...
Yeah, well, like for us, like, we see in a glass darkly right now. Like we can see, it's like looking through a dirty window or a dirty mirror. Like we can kind of make it out, but it's cloudy to us. But when he returns, it's all going to be made clear. So it could be. We just copy a lot of that kind of stuff, and when he actually comes and calls his people, maybe it'll be like a copycat enlightenment to the people that follow him. But however it works out, obviously when the tribulation gets here and that stuff gets underway, we're going to understand exactly like what's going on, and we'll probably be like scratching our head like, oh yeah, that's exactly what God meant. I don't know how I didn't see that. I'm sure like the Old Testament prophets, when they got up to heaven and they actually saw Jesus going down and coming back, they were like, oh, I wondered what that verse meant. I never could figure that out. And I think we'll be doing the same thing when we actually see things unfolding in Revelation. We're gonna be like, that's what God meant. So moving on with this, our timeline, Babylon, the mystery Babylon goes way back to just after the flood. Another thing, we did talk about how it's a religious system. Remember how I taught that women in the Bible represent religious systems, and we have a woman on the beast, and the church is pictured as a woman. The true believers in Jerusalem are pictured as a woman. The spirit of Jezebel, like a false system, was pictured as a woman. Israel going into idolatry and wickedness in the Old Testament were pictured as like an adulterous wife. So biblically, we did learn that women in the Bible picture some sort of a belief, some sort of a religious system or system of beliefs. So I think we're in Revelation 17. We'll pick it up in Revelation 17, 18. We went through Revelation 17 last time we were together, and we went through the description of this woman on the beast, and the heads, and the color of the beast, and the scarlet and the purple, and the kings and the hills. And now we're going to get into kind of an interesting section, because we're going to get into the fall and God's judgment that comes upon this system, this woman on the beast, and it actually tells us more information about it through God's judgment than just what we've already covered in the beginning of chapter 17. So we see this culmination of what started thousands of years ago in Babel, how this whole system has just been growing and spreading throughout the entire earth for all these years. But now the judgment has come. We're going to take a look at that judgment to see what we can learn. So in Revelation 17, 16 and 17, and the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. For God hath put in their hearts to fulfill his will, and to agree, and to give their kingdom unto the beast, until the words of God shall be fulfilled. So these 10 kings who serve Antichrist are actually going to turn against this woman, this whore that is on the beast, and it's the very people that she was fornicating with and having these relations with, that are going to turn against her and hate her and ultimately destroy her. So from a religious point of view, we see that there's a religious Babylon, so to speak, with the woman being pictured as a religious system. So possibly this could be some sort of a rebellion against religious authorities. Some people have said, like, if the Catholic Church or the one world religion of the time is in power, that the nations are going to turn against that, and it's possible. It could be the Antichrist at the height of his power doesn't want to share his glory with anybody. He doesn't want to even have a religious system anymore. He just wants people to come to him and directly worship him. But these nations, these kings, are the ones that turn on the woman and end up destroying her. And what would, and here these kings have been supporting her, that they've been working with her, they've been taking advantage of what they can gain from her. What would so motivate the kings of the earth, these 10 kings, to suddenly want to hate and turn on this woman? What would motivate people to do something? At first I thought, well, could it be like some sort of guilt? If you've fornicated with this harlot, maybe their hearts are pricked or something, but I don't believe it's that. I think that it's a bigger plan that God is putting in place. But I want to look into the motivation as far as what would cause these nations, these kings, to turn. So keep in mind, what is the greatest motivator of mankind? But moving on into the judgment, we see beginning in Revelation 18. And Revelation 18 is very detailed about all the judgment. But we'll start off in verse 1 and 2 there. And after these things, I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power. And the earth was lightened with his glory. And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen, and is become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. So we see a powerful angel comes down from heaven. That's going to be amazing to see. And that's just going to be awesome. I mean, the earth is literally lightened. Like this angel comes down and literally just brightens the earth with his glory. And he cries out about Babylon is fallen. And since this is the book of Revelation, and we're seeing the revealing of God's plan, when Babylon is finally fallen, right here we have a revelation of what is behind the system. Once it's fallen, we see that it's the habitation of devils and every foul spirit. So we see this whole system, this city, this mystery Babylon the Great, it's full of wickedness. There's a demonic, a satanic force behind it, foul spirits and devils, and unclean and hateful birds, which may be a reference to unclean spirits or something. I didn't look that up, but it would go along with the context of the verse. So we see that the forces of wickedness behind this whole system are finally revealed to the world. They actually see it for what it is. In Revelation 18:3 and 4, for all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornications, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her sins, and that ye receive not of her plagues. So I took note that it says all nations have drunk of the wine. And like I've said, so many people it would be so easy just to say, it's the Catholic Church. A lot of people just want to pin Babylon as the Catholic Church and show a bunch of pictures of popes with red and purple and all that. And it'll probably be part of it. But it says that all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. And I mean, there are nations on earth that really don't have a lot to do with the Catholic Church. I mean, sure, the Catholic Church has been heavily involved in America and South America and Europe and Britain, England. They're very entangled in politics, and there's those Catholic churches through all these nations. But what about like nations in the Middle East? I don't think you'll find many Catholic churches in Iran, Iraq, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon. I don't think that they have as much of a foothold. So to say that all nations have committed fornication with her and just say that that's the Catholic Church, I think that's an oversimplification. I think there's more to it than just some sort of an interaction with the Catholic Church as a religious organization.
I think it's pointing to like all religions and not just the Catholicism. Because like for all nations, and Babylon is like the main
the source,
starting place for all religions.
Right, and she's the mother of harlots.
Partaking of that source, whether it's being a Catholic or a Buddhist.
That's true. Even like Islam, I mean, it all came from a single,
right.
So it all spread out from there.
The wine basically from the same vineyard. The
right,
grapes coming from this vineyard.
It all goes back to the same thing, which is a good point. And again, why I say it's not just the Catholic Church. I've seen preaching where, just boom, 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 Catholic Church, and like that's it, wrap it up. But it's definitely bigger than that because it involves all nations. And then it's interesting that, and we'll get into this shortly, we'll be looking at a lot of scriptures, and keep your eye on like that word merchants, because yes, the kings of the earth are involved, but it's the merchants who are like the biggest players, almost more than the kings. It's the merchants that are the ones that are entangled the most with this system. But then this angel warns the people and says, come out of her, my people, that you be not partakers of her sins, and that you receive not of her plagues. So even in the midst of this wicked, rebellious, global system, God has people in it. And whether they're in there through ignorance or through lack of dedication to God, and they're just like kind of, compromising and partaking of it, for whatever reason they're in there, God warns them to come out. And isn't this just another picture of the mercy of God?
After the trip,
Is it the Jews?
After the rapture,
He's speaking to the Jews.
Oh, my people mean?
He's
People
calling,
like
yeah, he's
Jews?
calling out my people. And during the tribulation, my people will primarily be the Jews, but there may be other, non-Jews that can be saved. I mean, we do see during the sheep and the goat judgment.
Could they also be a part of like the gathering, like of the Jews?
Well, this isn't the ultimate gathering, like at the end when that big trumpet blows and God gathers his elect from the ends of the earth. This is different. This is him calling his people out of Babylon, and it's another example of the mercy of God, because like all the other great judgments that fall on the earth, think about the flood of Noah's time and Sodom and Gomorrah and the rapture. This is another picture of when God's going to bring severe judgment down. He gets his people out. He doesn't let his people, he doesn't punish his people with his judgment, with his wrath, mixed in with the wicked. He gets his people out. God has his own way. If you're God's child, he'll discipline you. You can fall under the discipline of God. People have bad things happen to them, and the rain falls on the just and the unjust. But when it comes to God's wrath being poured out against the wickedness of the earth, he's not going to let his people be tangled up with it. So similar to Noah and Lot and even the rapture, he calls his people out from the location or the people that he's going to be pouring his judgment out on. So just another example of God's mercy.
If he's saying, come out of her, my people, is he verbally telling them to get away somewhere? Or how do you come out of something when the whole world is...
I think he's saying like come out of like that false religion, because if he's talking about Babylon, and essentially the woman is false religion.
This is a verbal warning
It's the angel who comes to the earth.
and says, come out of her, my people.
Yeah, because judgment has come upon her.
But is he talking to the nation of Israel?
He was talking to anybody that's considered his people.
Well, how do they come out of it? Did they move?
Well, as I'll get more into it as far as what I believe it is.
Okay.
If you believe it's a political system, it means withdrawing from your entanglement in the political system. If you're involved in the economic system, then it would mean coming out of the economic system. It's also a location. It's a city or multiple cities, that a metropolis, a huge center of commerce and wealth and riches, and it could be, a call to come out of it. If it is a location. I mean, we know that Jewish people tend to be they tend to be wealthy. They tend to be businessmen, and they're very tied up in a lot of very wealthy organizations and businesses. A lot of the greatest inventions that we have today were invented by Jewish people.
I wonder how they'll understand that though, like that angel's voice. Can you go back one slide? When it just says a voice saying, "Come out of her, my people." Is that all people are going to hear? How would they know?
Well, it says
how to interpret.
He
Well,
says,
the first voice.
well, he
Now
says-
this is the second one.
well, and he cried mightily with a strong voice. So I believe everybody's going to hear it, and then a voice. This is another voice that comes from heaven. So this angel comes down and pronounces judgment is here, but then this other voice, which is probably the Lord, since he says, "Come out of her, my people." See, the people in the tribulation are not without, they're not left without instruction. I mean, you've got 3 angels that fly around the world and give instruction to people that have the everlasting gospel and the warning about Babylon, and so the people, they're going to have opportunity to repent. They're not just going to be left to themselves. They're not going to be, they won't have an excuse to say I didn't know. It's going to be loud and clear. If you stayed in Babylon and you were judged, you chose to do it. Nobody can say I don't know, I was just hanging out here. No, because it's made loud and clear. This angel is get out. Judgment is coming, and if you're caught up in it, it's your own fault.
So you believe Babylon will be a place in the future?
I believe
A
it.
location.
Yeah, I believe part of it is a place. Like it is going to be a location, because it does say specifically that it's a city. It's a great city.
It's interesting, like, I'm just trying to think of all these cities that it could possibly end up
Yeah,
being, like whether it would be Rome or
Yeah, I've been thinking that too, and it's well, I'll get more into it like later on, as I get more facts and stuff out. Okay, and then so this voice right after. Hey there. So moving on, Revelation 18:5-7. For her sins have reached unto heaven, and God hath remembered her iniquities. Reward her even as she rewarded you, and double unto her, double according to her works. And the cup which she hath filled, fill to her double. How much she hath glorified herself, and lived deliciously, so much torment and sorrow give her. For she saith in her heart, I sit a queen, and am no widow, and shall see no sorrow. So the wicked are storing up wrath in heaven. God up in heaven, the sins literally reach up to heaven in some way that it finally comes to a boiling point, and God deals with it. In Romans 2:5, there's a reference to the storing up wrath. But after thy hardness and impenitent heart treasurest up unto thyself wrath against the day of wrath, and the revelation of the righteous judgment of God. So this city, think about how long this has been going on for. This whole system that started back in Babel, it's been going for thousands of years, and it's been turning people away from God and destroying lives and just causing so much sin and wickedness in the world. And finally, after thousands of years of storing up wrath, it's time to pour out wrath back upon Babylon. And it's interesting to note that it almost sounds like God is calling his people as part of the judgment, because the verse right before says, come out of her my people, and then it says, reward her even as she has rewarded you. It's almost like, if there's righteous people or Jews that are believers, God brings them out, but then maybe turns them back as part of the judgment against her. It seems like it might imply that, because it's almost like he's giving instructions to somebody: reward her even as she has rewarded you. And he's speaking to his people, because he says, come out of her my people. So possibly they'll be actually involved in some sort of a judgment, or bringing something against this system. Therefore shall her plagues come in one day, death and mourning and famine, and she shall be utterly burned with fire. For strong is the Lord God who judgeth her, and the kings of the earth who have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her shall bewail her and lament for her, when they shall see the smoke of her burning, standing afar off for the fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour is thy judgment come. So we have these kings mourning and wailing. And again, I say, would the kings of the earth really mourn and wail if the Catholic Church blew up? If Rome suddenly got blown up, I can't see the kings of the earth all mourning and wailing. So that's why I don't see the Catholic Church as just fulfilling what Mystery Babylon is. Because you've got these kings of the earth deeply disturbed by Babylon's destruction. And I will kind of go through quickly the rest of Revelation 18, because I got some other cross-references I want to go through. But it gets kind of interesting here. I mentioned keeping your eye on the merchants, right? So as we read through this, we've got the merchants underlined. Starting in verse 11, and the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, For no man buyeth their merchandise any more. The merchandise of gold and silver and precious stones and of pearls and fine linen and purple and silk and scarlet and all thine wood and all manner vessels of ivory and all manner vessels of most precious wood and of brass and iron and marble and cinnamon and odors and ointments and frankincense and wine and oil and fine flour and wheat and beasts and sheep and horses and chariots and slaves and souls of men. And the fruits that thy soul lusted after are departed from thee, and all things which were dainty and goodly are departed from thee, and thou shalt find them no more at all. The merchants of these things, which were made rich by her, shall stand afar off for the fear of her torment, weeping and wailing, and saying, Alas, alas, that great city that was clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls. For in 1 hour so great riches is come to naught, and every shipmaster and all the company and ships and sailors, and as many as trade by sea, stood afar off and cried when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, What city is like unto this great city? So, if this is just Rome, why are all these merchants of the earth so upset? Why are they weeping and wailing? If it's just the Catholic Church, though.
No, I know. I think
You
the
know,
Catholic Church is part of it.
It's obviously something way bigger than the Catholic Church, because I mean we're talking all these merchants who were made, filthy rich by all the, trade, and the whole list goes on and on. From Walmart. Walmart is Babylon.
Walmart headquarters. Babylon. Hey, no one will be able to buy anything. Everyone goes to Walmart.
Yeah,
That's
there
what
you
I'm
go.
saying, they're
Or like think
making
of all
us
like the
all
people
go
that.
to Walmart.
Well, yeah, if you look at
Shutting
it.
everything down but Walmart.
Well, look at
Walmart's
look
open.
at with COVID how all businesses were closed, but Walmart, all the major corporations stayed open. You know?
Yeah,
Who's funding those corporations? You got follow the money.
yeah, exactly. In Revelation 18:19, and they cast dust on their heads and cried, weeping and wailing, saying, Alas, alas, that great city wherein were made rich all that had ships in the sea by reason of her costliness. For in 1 hour she is made desolate. So this city is responsible for just immeasurable wealth, just massive amounts of wealth. I mean, there's more in her judgment about people mourning about her wealth. I mean, God almost takes an entire chapter here just to tell us all the stuff that they bought and sold and traded, all the goods and the frankincense and the animals and slaves and just all the riches. So what if the greatest false religion of all isn't what we think it is? So when you think of a false religion, what do you think of? If somebody was to ask you, what's a false religion?
Anything that doesn't name the name of Christ, anything that's contrary to the Word of God is a false religion.
Right, but how would you if you're talking to somebody, trying to tell them how to identify it? I mean, just typically when you think of what's a false religion, what's the first thing that pops in your head? Usually, don't you think you think cults and maybe Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons or Islam or the idolatry that took place in the Old Testament with sacrificing children and all that. But what if the absolute greatest false religion of all is very different than what we actually think it is? So there's a God that takes the place of the God in most people's lives. What God would that be? What is most of mankind seeking? What God demands the most time and energy from mankind? What do men spend most of their lives doing? What God can drive men to forsake all and follow it? What God can drive men to even leave their families and even the pleasures of this world and strive after it? I mean, as just a little hint, you might see where I'm going with this, but this God is responsible for destroying more families than any of the other ones, any other things in this world. The number one cause of divorce this God. What?
Women?
That's not all college.
No. Well, I can see that would motivate. It would definitely motivate some things, but but what motivates women too? I use the word man here in general, but same thing goes for women. What God can drive some men to heights of joy and depths of despair. So the whims of this God literally determine whether somebody's having a great life or a horrible life. What God can drive men to sacrifice their own lives for it. What God will men literally jump out of buildings and kill themselves if they can't achieve what they desire with this God. What God causes men to forsake their convictions and conscience and follow it. This is a God that takes decent people that may have had a good upbringing and were like good, upstanding people, and when they go after this God, they throw it all away and they start doing wickedness, and they get deeper and deeper into just wickedness and violence and everything that would be against the true God. This God makes good people go bad. What God causes the rise and fall of nations, little g now. I know that the big G God is in ultimate control of everything, but on a day-to-day basis in this world, what really determines whether a nation is going to be successful or not. So I think you'll probably have a good idea where I'm going with this. For the love of money.
Who said that?
Yeah.
Every kind of thing.
Yeah. In 1 Timothy 6:10, I think this is a key verse because it says, "For the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith and pierced themselves through with money, with many sorrows." With money. So we have the love of money is the root, right? The root. The root is the beginning. It's where it all started, right? If you take this verse literally, and the love of money is the root of all evil. And so when you think back, think way back when evil first came into this world. Think way back. We're talking like way back with Satan in the very beginning, with Adam and Eve. This is the root, the love of money. It's the root of all evil, not some evil. Kind of interesting, but this is one of the verses that all the new versions change. If you don't have a King James Bible, you'll get a very different doctrine out of that verse. So either the love of money is the root of all evil, or like the NIV says, for the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Right? Big difference in what that says. But our Bible says, for the love of money is the root. If all evil started with a love of money, or greed, or desire for gain, what if Satan's first sin was some sort of greed? What if it was gain? What if it wasn't just, to cause Adam and Eve to fall and, try to get some sort of worship for himself? If the love of money and the love of gain is the root, if it's the beginning of all evil, what if that was actually part of Satan's original plan? And his plan was for gain through greed.
Well, he used it on Adam and Eve in the garden.
He had some sort of a plan. But if the love of money is the root of all evil, it says all evil. That's go all the way back to, Satan tempting Adam and Eve. There was something in the back of his mind that was gain. Love of money was involved in that.
There's money in heaven.
I don't know about heaven, but on earth. But I'll get more into that.
I think it was more of like a power thing though too. When he was offering the fruit, the forbidden fruit.
We'll get into it.
Just imagine if it was in the form of money.
Right.
Because money buys power.
Right. I'll get more into it. I'll flesh this out more as we go on. But, it all started with money. All men seek it. They forsake family for it. They kill themselves over it. Think about all the wars and conquests that have been motivated by money. I mean, if it wasn't for money,
In religion.
yeah, I mean, and religion is tied in with money because there's big money in religion and using even religion as like an excuse. I mean, you've got like the Catholic Church during like the Crusades and stuff wanting to like take over land. You've got the Muslims who were fighting back, and they want to spread their beliefs by the sword. But behind it all, there's a desire for gain. It's not the Catholic Church just didn't want to come to South America just for the sake of making more Catholic churches. They knew that here's a whole country full of people, and we stand to gain millions and billions of dollars if we can convert South America. Just think of the tithes and the money and the indulgences and the offerings that they could get from those people. This money is such a motivator. So I think money and greed, is what may motivate these kings that rebel against the woman and end up destroying her. But what would motivate them? It would have to be some sort of a financial gain. Would there have to be some sort of a great motivation, some sort of a gain to turn on this woman? Not a problem. All right, so who is behind this mega religion of greed and corruption? The evil guy with the business suit on. So let's take a look at one of his earlier attempts, because this whole system that we see in Revelation 18, Satan, it's not the first time he's tried this. He's done it before. So if you want to read along with me, it's a little bit of reading, but I want to look through Ezekiel 27 and 28, because there's a lot of similarities, and I think it gives us some insight into it. So if you remember, in the Bible there are two very insightful descriptions into Satan and his beginnings and kind of like his fall originally. And in Isaiah 14, you have where God is talking about Satan and how that's where you find all the I wills, like I will ascend, I will, go above the clouds, I will be like the Most High. So we see a lot of the pride part of the I wills in Isaiah 14. But in Ezekiel 28 especially, but 27 sets it up, we really see a different side of Satan that I hadn't really realized before. We always just thought of Satan as this proud being that just wants to be worshipped. But I think there's more to Satan than that. And this is, I might have mentioned, I'm seeing another side of Satan through doing this study. It's not just pride that he wants. So let's take a look at, be patient with me. I know it's a couple chapters, but it's interesting reading though. And so this is Ezekiel prophesying against Tyre, which is a city back in the Old Testament, and specifically talking about this the ruler of Tyre and the judgment coming against this ruler. But you also see, because God ends up speaking things about the ruler of Tyre that can't apply to a man. It talks about him being in the Garden of Eden and being the covering cherub. So we know that even though he's pronouncing a prophecy of judgment against this city of Tyre and leader of Tyre, but we see that Satan is the one directly responsible in the background. So even though he's speaking to a man, it's like Satan is standing right behind the man, and he's addressing them both, and almost more Satan than this man. And I think it's going to be the same thing with the Antichrist and the end time Babylon the Great. It's going to be the Antichrist, empowered and directly led by Satan, that's in charge of this system that he's going to have during this end times and the tribulation. But let's dig into Ezekiel 27 here. Now the word of the Lord came again unto me, saying, Now, thou son of man, take up a lamentation for Tyrus, and say unto Tyrus, O thou that art situate at the entry of the sea, which art a merchant of the people for many isles, thus saith the Lord God, O Tyrus, thou hast said, I am of perfect beauty. The borders are in the midst of the seas. Just look for the correlations with Revelation. I mean, you can see them right off the bat. We saw that the woman on the beast who sitteth upon many waters, right? And now we have Tyre. The borders are in the midst of the seas. Thy builders have perfected thy beauty. They have made all thy shipboards of fir trees of senir. They have taken cedars from Lebanon to make masts for thee. Of the oaks of Bashan they have made thine oars. Of the company of the Asherites have made thy benches of ivory, bought out of the isles of Chittim. Fine linen with broidered work from Egypt was that which thou spreadest forth to be thy sail. Blue and purple from the isles of Elisha was that which covered thee. The inhabitants of Zidon and Arvad were thy mariners. Thy wise men, O Tyrus, that were in thee were thy pilots. The ancients of Jebel and the wise men thereof were in thee thy caulkers. All the ships of the sea with their mariners were in thee to occupy thy merchandise. So here again, references to merchandise and merchants. They of Persia and of Lud and of Phut were in thine army. Thy men of war, they hang the shield and helmet in thee. They set forth thy comeliness. The men of Arvad with thine army were upon thy walls round about, and the Gambadins were in the towers and hang their shields upon thy walls round about, and they have made thy beauty perfect. Tarshish was thy merchant by reason of the multitude of all kind of riches, with silver, iron, tin, and lead. They traded in thy fairs. Javan, Tubal, and Meshech, they were thy merchants. They traded with the persons of men and vessels of brass in thy market. They of the house of Torgama traded in thy fairs with horses and horsemen and mules. The men of Dedan were thy merchants. Many isles were the merchandise of thine hand. They brought thee for a present horns of ivory and ebony. Syria was thy merchant by reason of the multitude of the wares of thy making. They occupied in thy fairs with emeralds, purple, embroidered work, and fine linen, and coral, and agate. Judah and the land of Israel, they were thy merchants. They traded in thy market wheat of Minnith, and Panag, and honey, and oil, and balm. Damascus was thy merchant in the multitude of the wares of thy making, for the multitude of all thy riches, and the wine of Helbon and white wool. Dan also and Javan, going to and fro, occupied in thy fairs. Bright iron, cassia, and calamus were in thy market. Dedan was thy merchant in precious clothes for chariots. Arabia and all the princes of Kedar, they occupied with thee in lambs and rams and goats, and these were they thy merchants. The merchants of Sheba and Ramah, they were thy merchants. They occupied in thy fairs with the chief of all spices and with all precious stones and gold. Haran and Cana and Eden, the merchants of Sheba, Asher, and Chilmad, were thy merchants. They were thy merchants in all sorts of things, in blue cloth, embroidered work, and in chests of rich apparel bound with cords and made of cedar among thy merchandise. The ships of Tarshish did sing in thy market, and was replenished and made very glorious in the midst of the seas. Thy rowers have brought thee into great waters. The east wind hath broken thee in the midst of the seas. Thy riches and thy fairs, thy merchandise, thy mariners and thy pilots, thy caulkers, and the occupiers of thy merchandise, and all thy men of war that are in thee, and in all thy company which is in the midst of thee, shall fall into the midst of the seas in the day of thy ruin. And the suburbs shall shake at the sound of the cry of thy pilots. And all that handled the oar, the mariners, and all the pilots of the sea, shall come down from their ships, and they shall stand upon the land, and shall cause their voice to be heard against thee, and shall cry bitterly, and shall cast up dust upon their heads. They shall wallow themselves in the ashes, and they shall make themselves utterly bald for thee, and gird them with sackcloth. And they shall weep for thee with bitterness of heart, and with bitter wailing. And in their wailing they shall take up a lamentation for thee, and lament over thee, saying, What city is like Tyrus, like the destroyed in the midst of the sea? When thy wares went forth out of the seas, thou fillest many people. Thou didst enrich the kings of the earth with the multitude of thy riches and thy merchandise. In the time when thou shalt be broken by the seas in the depths of the waters, thy merchandise and all thy company in the midst of thee shall fall. All the inhabitants of the isles shall be astonished at thee, and the kings shall be sore afraid. They shall be troubled in their countenance. The merchants among the people shall hiss at thee. Thou shalt be a terror, and never shalt be any more. Going on to 28. And the word of the Lord came again unto me, saying, Son of man, say unto the prince of Tyrus. Now we're getting into the actual leader of the city, where the last chapter was more of a description of the riches. And do you see what I mean? There's definitely like a comparison between this Babylon that we see in Revelation 18 and Ezekiel 27. It's all about the wealth and the riches and the merchants, and even a description of all the different wares that are being traded, from beasts and animals to slaves and wine and cotton and wheat, and there's a lot of similarities. In Ezekiel 28, verse 2, Son of man, say unto the prince of Tyrus, Thus saith the Lord God, because thine heart is lifted up, and thou hast said, I am a God. I sit in the seat of God. Right? Now, this happened. This is a pronouncement against the prince of Tyrus, right? But doesn't this sound exactly like what the Antichrist is going to do? That's like almost word for word the abomination of desolations that we read about in Thessalonians, where it talks about the man of sin setting himself up in the temple, showing that he is God. Right? Definite similarity here. Because thou hast said, I am a God. I sit in the seat of God, in the midst of the seas. The woman and the beast was on many waters. Yet thou art a man and not God, though thou set thine heart as the heart of God. Behold, thou art wiser than Daniel. There is no secret that they can hide from thee. Now, you can see where this is turning, where God is, you can see he's speaking to Satan here. This is him actually speaking to Lucifer, because he gets into descriptions that can't apply to a man. So keep that in mind and try to see the workings behind Satan's motivations through this. Verse 4, With thy wisdom and with thine understanding thou hast gotten thee riches, and hast gotten gold and silver into thy treasures. By thy great wisdom and by thy traffic hast thou increased thy riches, and thine heart is lifted up because of thy riches. Therefore, thus saith the Lord God, because thou hast set thine heart as the heart of God, behold, therefore I will bring strangers upon thee, the terrible of the nations, and they shall draw their swords against the beauty of thy wisdom, and they shall defile thy brightness. They shall bring thee down to the pit, and thou shalt die the deaths of them that are slain in the midst of the seas. Wilt thou yet say before him that slayeth thee, I am God? But thou shalt be a man and no God in the hand of him that slayeth thee. Thou shalt die the deaths of the uncircumcised by the hand of strangers, for I have spoken it, saith the Lord God. Moreover, the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, take up a lamentation upon the king of Tyrus, and say unto him, Thus saith the Lord God, Thou sealest up the sum full of wisdom, perfect in beauty. Thou hast been in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was thy covering, the sardius, the topaz, and the diamond, the beryl, the onyx, and the jasper, the sapphire, the emerald, and the carbuncle, and gold. The workmanship of thy tabrets and of thy pipes was prepared in thee in the day that thou wast created. Thou art the anointed cherub that covereth, and I have set thee so. Thou wast upon the holy mountain of God, and hast walked up and down in the midst of the stones of fire. Thou wast perfect in thy ways from the day that thou wast created, till iniquity was found in thee. By the multitude of thy merchandise they have filled the midst of thee with violence, and thou hast sinned. Therefore I will cast thee as profane out of the mountain of God, and will destroy thee, O covering cherub, from the midst of the stones of fire. Thine heart was lifted up because of thy beauty, Thou hast corrupted thy wisdom by reason of thy brightness. I will cast thee to the ground. I will lay thee before kings, that they may behold thee. Thou hast defiled thy sanctuaries by the multitude of thine iniquities, by the iniquity of thy traffic, merchandising, buying and selling, riches. Therefore will I bring forth a fire from the midst of thee. It shall devour thee, and I will bring thee to ashes upon the earth in the sight of all them that behold thee. And they that know thee among the people shall be astonished at thee. Thou shalt be a terror, and never shalt thou be anymore. So I think this gives us a lot of insight into what Satan's motivations are. I think Satan's greedy. I think it's more than just him wanting worship and just wanting to be glorified and take the place of God. I think Satan is a greedy. He wants to be wealthy. He wants riches. He loves money and gain. And it's almost like God is saying here, like, you were glorious. You were covered with like wealth and stones and precious things. And in spite of all that, you went and created this whole wicked city that's like full of trafficking and wealth and power, and and he's actually judged for that. So keep all this in mind in comparing Revelation 18 with what we saw about Tyre and the prince of Tyre here. Back to my thing here. I kind of put together, that came out really small, but I was looking at some of the major similarities between the two cities. So like in Tyre, we have like the borders are in the midst of the seas, and Babylon the Great sitteth on many waters. In Tyre, merchants partook of her riches. In Babylon, the merchants were made rich. They both traded slaves. They both traded beasts, all sorts of precious things, the whole list of stuff that were bought and sold. When judgment came, both Tyre and Babylon, merchants were some of the greatest mourners of her loss, as well as the kings of the earth were troubled. We see in Ezekiel 27 and Revelation 18, the kings of the earth troubled, mourn. In Ezekiel 27, they say, what city is like this Tyrus? On Revelation 18:18, what city is like this city? See, the comparison between the two is amazing. In Ezekiel 28, God brings other nations and strangers to turn against Tyrus and destroy it. Kind of interesting that Babylon is destroyed by other nations, and our other nations are brought against it. In Ezekiel, we have the prince of Tyrus, through Satan, saying that I am God, I sit in the seat of God. In Babylon, we see her, it says that she glorifies herself and she sits a queen. It said maybe queen of heaven, as we've seen Babylon with the whole queen of heaven, sun god worship thing possibly. And kind of an interesting reference to the pit. In Ezekiel 28, you have the ruler of Tyre being brought down to the pit, but in Revelation 17, we see a beast that comes up from the pit. So kind of just a lot of little interesting things here. So let's take a look at harlotry and how it relates to a city. So we have an example of Jerusalem. God calls Jerusalem a harlot. In Isaiah 1:21-23, how is the faithful city become an harlot? It was full of judgment, righteousness lodged in it, but now murderers. Thy silver is become dross, thy wine mixed with water. Thy princes are rebellious and companions of thieves. Everyone loveth gifts and followeth after rewards. They judge not the fatherless, neither doth the cause of the widow come unto them. So this actually defines for us, like, if a city is considered a harlot, this is how it would be described. There's no righteousness. There's no fair judgment. The judicial system is corrupt. Oh, I had a picture there, but it didn't show up on there. So, but anyway, I had a gavel there with a little for sale sign on it. It was like a symbol of, like, the judicial system. Like, you can't find like a fair judge to like give you a fair hearing. We see that it's full of murders and violence. a reference like silver is dross. What was once valuable is now worthless. We see, with inflation, our money is becoming worth less and less and less. Things that used to matter in our society, like honor and justice and even like patriotism and stuff, it's like worthless now. Things that people used to value at one time now become worthless, and it all revolves around money. There's a reference to the wine mixed with water. Just think about like a bartender who's watering down the wine. It's like because he wants to make more money. It's a sign of greed. To water down the whiskey, give them, you can sell more of it and make more money. But it's also a symbol. It symbolizes like impurity. It's not pure wine. It's mixed. It's weak. It could be weak-minded people, weak doctrine. There's not even an appreciation for like a good quality wine anymore. People just want to get drunk. They just, I don't care what it tastes like. Just, give it to me so I can have the effects of it. I thought it was kind of funny because we actually have like for sale those like alcohol like waters in the store. You can get like those fizzy,
Sparkling.
Yeah, like sparkling. It's not even like we went from wine to wine coolers to
White Claw.
Yeah, it's like White Claws. It's like alcoholic water. It's like wine mixed with water. We have it like literally today for sale. And I thought it was interesting because in the Catholic Church, you know how they have the bread and the wine? It's a mandatory requirement in the Catholic Church. You have to mix water with the wine before you give it to the people. It's in their doctrine. You have to mix the water and the wine. But yet it's interesting because God actually looks at that as like a part of being corrupted. That's part of the corruption that he said in Israel, in Jerusalem, that their wine was mixed with water. Just a lack of purity, physical, spiritual, mentally. And even just like there's no right and wrong anymore. Like everything's mixed. Like there's no definite right, definite wrong. Everything's all gray now. It's something that it drives me crazy. Like with like modern TV shows, in the old days you had a good guy and you had a bad guy. Like if you like Captain Kirk, you knew he was always going to be the good guy, right? Like Captain Kirk would never go bad and like shoot somebody who was innocent. But now like you watch a TV show and like you got a good guy that you think and a bad guy, but then you get into it and all of a sudden like the good guy goes bad and the bad guy's maybe not as bad as you thought he was, and he's got some reasons for what he was doing, and like it's all confusing. Like there's no concrete black white anymore. It's all kind of blending together. We see rebellious princes, leaders of the country, companions of thieves. Obviously, I don't even have to go into how corrupt our government is. Politicians no longer represent the people. The people in office now aren't there to really represent our desires. They're not there to, argue on our behalf to try to have the government serve us. They're there. It's all about money and about power. It's all greed and corruption. It's all about who can get the most political contributions. To get elected into a high office, it's not about being a man of integrity or conviction. Whoever gets the most backing, whoever can get the most big tech companies behind them to fund their campaigns, they're the ones that are going to get into the office. It talks about bribery, gifts, rewards, says like how everybody loves gifts. And a big part of our society today, bribery and payoffs determine policy and judgment. Money rules all. If you have money, you can get away with anything. And the poor have no voice. The fatherless and widows have no defense. We see that today. If you don't have money, you don't have much of a say in anything. The government just does what they want, and if you don't have the money to make a difference, then you just are forced to go along with them. So what if Satan's goal isn't only to have the whole world worship him? What if he's trying to gain the whole world too? Remember Jesus referencing, what shall it profit a man if he gain the whole world and lose his soul? Well, what if that's exactly what Satan's trying to do? What if Satan's plan from the garden wasn't just to make man fall into sin? What if it was to create a system of economics and greed and gain and be in such control of it that he would essentially own the world.
Like a dependence.
I mean, when God created the world, he gave it to Adam and Eve. Like, Adam was the master of the world. Like, he owned it. Like, everything was given to him. And Satan, through his plan, is almost like trying to buy the world. Like, he's trying to gain enough power and wealth to essentially, like, literally own the world. So we see in Isaiah 14, we didn't read it, but I referenced it. It really, these are like to the two sides of Satan. You have Isaiah 14, which is like Satan's pride. It's about how I will ascend. I will be like God. You know, I will do this and I will get above the clouds. But then we just read in Ezekiel 28, where Satan's plan in action was a plan that put him in charge of the largest, most wealthy, powerful center of merchandising in the entire world. It wasn't about just being worshipped. He wanted to have the wealth and the power all flowing through his city. So no wonder the love of money is the root of all evil. It's where Satan started, going way back. God gave Satan, blessed him with like beauty and strength and precious things, and he wanted more. He was greedy and wanted gain.
And didn't he even show Jesus? Look
Yeah,
at
he's-
all this that I have.
Yeah,
I'll give it to you.
he's achieved it. Like, his plan has been in action for thousands of years, and he had gained like the control where he had a say to be able to actually do that. I mean, essentially has bought the world out from man. So we learned a little bit about the Antichrist a while back, and we saw that like he has immense wealth. It talks about him having like all the gold in Egypt and just gaining all kinds of great wealth through his deceptions and lying. It's interesting that every culture has a god of wealth. You know, doesn't you go way back, you know, along with you know, the sun god and the Queen of Heaven and the different Catholic saints, whatever you want to, all the different gods, and even in the old pagan worship, every culture has a god of wealth. It's always been something where they'll just literally worship this god that is representing wealth, the wealth of the world. But every culture with that god of wealth, like when they gain it, they get corrupted. Like, think about America. Like, we started on good foundation, solid principles, godly principles, and we were blessed and we were strong and did well. But once America got wealthy and powerful, think about the corruption that's come in with the wealth and power. With the wealth and the power comes all kinds of corruption and greed and bribery and you know, just all the wickedness that comes with it. God's original plan, like, we believe in capitalism, right? Like, you know, buying and selling and trading, and you know, I mean, money in itself isn't evil, but God's original plan wasn't capitalism. You know, he didn't intend for, you know, Adam to work 9 to 5 and, you know, scrape by to earn a paycheck and then have to give a big chunk of taxes to the government and, you know, and a bunch of other fees and hidden taxes and things to people. He literally gave the world to Adam and said, it's yours. Like, go out and conquer it. Have dominion over the animals. Have dominions over the plants. Just go out there. It's all yours. The wealth of the world was given freely to Adam. And yet Satan, after the fall, has created this whole system of economics and capitalism, and just where everything revolves around money. Jesus said you cannot serve God and mammon. I think Satan is actually trying to do just that. God said you can't serve God and money. But yet, I believe Satan is going to try to bring these two systems together. A system of him being worshipped as God, but also being the center and financial hub of the world, in control of all the world's finances. In Philippians 3:17 through 20, brethren, be followers together of me, and mark them which walk so as ye have us for an example. For many walk, of whom I have told you often, and now tell you even weeping, that they are enemies of the cross of Christ, whose end is destruction, whose God is their belly, whose glory is their shame, who mind earthly things. For our conversation is in heaven, from whence we also look for the Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ. So our conversation is in heaven. We're looking for Christ, but the people who are minding these earthly things, whose only goal in life is to get gain and to get wealth and riches and money, it says that their glory is their shame, their God is their belly, and their end is destruction. So to kind of summarize and try to get this all in some sort of an orderly presentation, Mystery Babylon is a false religious system. We established that it's a woman on the beast. A woman in the Bible represents a religious system. Mystery Babylon is a city. It plainly tells us this woman is a city. And I think it may be more of a metropolis, maybe incorporating all nations. We talked about the city on 7 hills. Well, if that city is all part of a metropolis, the 7 continents, what if it's every continent, it's all connected now. Everything's connected through commerce and trade. It can't just be religion. It talked more about the merchants and giving descriptions of all the things that are being bought and sold and traded. It told us more about that than it did about the false religion and what was going on religiously. So we see that it's this wealthy metropolitan city, and it sits on many waters. So it seems like it's something it's global. Babylon may not just be like just Rome, but it sits on many waters. And many waters also is defined in Revelation as being the Gentile nations. So it's some sort of a global Gentile system of wealth. Mystery Babylon is a corrupt, evil political system. As we just looked at, the definition of a whore as a city in Isaiah 1 talked about how it was so corrupt that there was no judgment, that judgment was paid for with money, that everyone loved gifts and bribery. So by the fact that Babylon is this whore, we know that it's an evil political system too. So to try to sum it up, so we have a false religious system, a system of wealth and power, and a corrupt political system. So I think Mystery Babylon will be a global false religion based on the worship of wealth and power, controlled by the Antichrist, who's directly empowered by Satan. I'm just trying to pull all this together because it is a false religious system. It's a city or cities. It's a political system. And if you mix all that together, you've got politics, wealth, and great amounts of trading, and a political system. So I think you can just kind of mix that all together, and it's like going to be some sort of a false religion where it could just literally be like a worship of wealth and power. Like that's all people care about. If you love money and you love gain, that's a false god. That's a false religion. The one world religion may not be everyone flocking to Allah or Mary or some sort of a religious system. What if everybody just puts any concept of God aside and it's just all going after wealth and power and all tied in? Because we see that whoever doesn't have the mark can't even buy or sell. So Satan, through the Antichrist, is literally going to control the entire economy of the world and not allow anybody who doesn't worship him or follow him to buy or sell. So it's all tied together. It started with Satan in the beginning. The love of money is the root. Satan's plan. Could this have been part of Satan's plan in aiding man's fall into sin? Satan may have known Adam had the whole world. How easy, he had nothing to struggle for. The world would just bring forth its food and he wouldn't have to really work for anything. How do you tempt somebody who has everything? If everybody can have everything they want just given to them, like the earth just brings it forth, doesn't it make much more difficult to tempt them? You can't bribe somebody if they already have everything they need. So maybe it was Satan's plan to like the reason he wanted Adam and Eve to fall, so that the world would become corrupted like that, and he could start a system where Adam would now have to work for a living, that he would have to eat bread by the sweat of his hands or the sweat of his brow and work with his hands. And as soon as you have to have a man working in order to gain the things that he wants, well, now you've got a way to tempt him. Now you've got a power that you can tempt him with, like, well, gee, if you just take these shortcuts, or if you just do this little bit of wickedness, or you just cheat or lie or steal a little bit, you won't have to work as hard and you can still get what you want. Maybe Satan's whole plan in getting Adam and Eve to fall was to get them into a system of supply and demand, of work and repayment, and to begin this whole system of money and wealth and power. The mother of harlots, I mean, this beginning, if this is how it all started, going way back, it spread to all nations and cultures seeking wealth and power, and many times under the guise of religion. A lot of times people, well, let's go on this crusade, or let's, go to this land and try to, take it for the church. But it's all about wealth and power. All false religions are based on greed. Think about it. All the religions out there, going way back to ancient, idols and sacrifices, it's all about, what can my God do for me? Think about even back in the Old Testament, they'd sacrifice their children, or they'd pray to these statues and cut themselves, and it was praying that their God would bless their crops or bless their herds or cattle, or some sort of gain.
Most religions were also really flashy too.
Yeah, a lot of them,
as idols and stuff. And
a lot of gold and fancy stuff.
Look at Egypt.
But what I'm saying is, most people in false religions, they're in it for what they can get out of it, right? It's like, if I believe this, and we see even today with the prosperity gospel, just come and be a Christian, and God will give you a brand new car and give you a nice house, and whatever you want. You just have to believe hard enough. So it's always about, false religion is about, what can God do for me? Even the Catholic Church, if you're a politician, you'll get farther if you're blessed by the Catholic Church. They literally put kings on their thrones and taken them down if they didn't agree with what the Catholic Church wanted. So people are looking for power or physical blessings, or even just natural human lust. Look at the Muslims. If you please Allah, you'll get 70 virgins when you get to heaven. So your motivation isn't just to please my God and make him happy. It's I want to do this so I can get something. The true religion that we believe is completely the opposite. It's the only one. It's not what God can do for us. It's what God already did for us, and what can we do now for God. We're not serving God for any kind of gain. We're not serving God so that he blesses our paychecks or gives us a bigger house or a better car. God already did everything he needs to do for us. And now we just live our lives in gratitude for him and thankfulness, and serve him for what he's already done. Satan's ultimate goal, to gain the worship we see in Isaiah 14, and the world, Ezekiel 28. He wants the worship. He wants people to acknowledge him as God, but I think he also wants to own the world. Literally, I think he wants to have all the wealth and all the gain that he can possibly get in the world. But it'll all come to an end in a single day, when God destroys both Satan and his religious system. No wonder, if the entire religious system, if the entire system of Babylon is destroyed, no wonder the world is in such utter chaos. The kings are weeping, the merchants are weeping, because it's not just a religious system that's falling. What if the entire system of the economy of the world as we know it is completely wiped out? What if that's what God does away with? What if this whole one world religion is an economic religion where people worship money and gain, and God brings that to an end, and now all of a sudden people are like, what are we going to do? Where are we going to get our food? Where are we going to get our clothes? Where are we going to get everything that we want and our cars? It's no wonder the kings and the merchants are weeping and mourning. So then afterwards, God sets up his own economy during the millennium, and it's a lot different than what we've seen in the world. In Isaiah, it talks about, and they shall build houses and inhabit them, and they shall plant vineyards and eat the fruit of them. They shall not build and another inhabit, they shall not plant and another eat. Whereas the days of a tree are the days of my people, and my elect shall long enjoy the work of their hands. They shall not labor in vain or bring forth trouble, for they are the seed of the blessed of the Lord, and their offspring with them. In Micah 4:4, but they shall sit every man under his vine and under his fig tree, and none shall make them afraid, for the mouth of the Lord of hosts has spoken it. It sounds like in the millennium, we're not going to have this crazy system that we're stuck in today. It doesn't sound like it's going to be the rat race. You know, it's like you're not going to build a house and somebody else live in it. You're not going to labor in vain. It sounds like you're going to work, because God said a man should work. But I think you're going to be able to enjoy that. You're not going to be giving half your wages away to the government. There's going to be peace and rest, rewards for labor, not taken away by taxes and corrupt leaders and politicians. So that is it.